Okay, so now let's put our average product and marginal product together with our average cost, or average variable cost it's actually going to be, and our average cost, and our marginal cost. So I'm not going to show them on the same diagram because they actually have different axes, but I'm going to show the relationship between the two. So remember, I'm going to draw them one on top of each other. So remember, with average product and marginal product, along the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we had the quantity of whichever factor of production that you're varying in quantity. So we did labour before because you have to study labour markets as part of the micro A2 course. So we might as well look at it at this point. And we had output along the y-axis, and average product did something like this. Average product and marginal product did something like this. Okay, intersecting at the highest point with average product. Marginal product was there, and we said that when marginal product reaches its peak and goes onwards that way, we get diminishing marginal returns. And I didn't really explain that in the last video, but the reason for that is, as I said before, we get benefits from employees being able to work together and learn from each other, but after a certain point they start to bump into each other. And the best example I've got of this is when I'm in class and we're doing a kind of craft project, maybe with the GCSE students, and I've only got so many pairs of scissors. So say I've got 10 pairs of scissors and I only have 7 students, that's fine. Then they're not going to have any problems. They only need 1 pair each. But say I've got 20 students, I've only got 10 pairs of scissors. They are going to have to wait to use the scissors. It gets quite frustrating. And in this example, therefore, the scissors are the fixed factor of production. So remember, we're talking about the short run here, and this is why we get diminishing marginal returns, because one of those factors of production is fixed. So my capital, in this case, my scissors, were fixed. So I can keep adding students in, and yeah, for a while I'll add to my total product. If I add hundreds of students in, I'm going to start taking away from my total product because they're going to start bumping into each other and seriously annoy each other. But at a certain point, before I start taking away from that total product, say I've got 10 pairs of scissors but 18 students, and I add 1 more in, the additional output that student can create is probably a lot smaller than the 18th or the 17th added to output. Again, just because there is a fixed factor of production. So that was the diagram that we had before, where we can show diminishing marginal returns. But more commonly, actually, firstly, to point out this marginal product, if we add an L on the end of there's your demand curve for labour. So that comes up on the course later on, and we don't usually draw the average product when we're doing labour markets, but there you go, there's your demand curve for labour. So that's where that fits into the course, and it's downward sloping because you do get diminishing returns. However, when we're looking at market structure, monopolies, oligopolies, perfect competition, monopolistic competition, if you've studied that, we're looking at cost curves usually. So let's draw another diagram. So along the x-axis, now we're going to switch it so that it's output. So output I'm taking from up the side to down at the bottom, and up the y-axis, the vertical axis, we've got costs. Okay, so labour obviously is going to add to that. That's going to be a variable cost. The more output we produce, the more labour we need to produce it. It's going to be one of our variable costs, certainly if we're paying wages, paying by the hour. But there are also going to be other costs as well. Some fixed costs, our rent, our fixed costs of our capital as well. The machine costs, maybe a variable cost could be the maintenance of it. But what we get is, if I draw a line down here, we're going to get, that would represent our average variable costs. and where it intersects is our marginal cost. So the marginal cost is just a mirror image of the marginal product, and the average variable cost is just a mirror image of the average product. And they intersect at the point there. It is, I mean, it's not the same axes. They always show this kind of diagram in textbooks. It's not actually the same axes. This is the quantity of labour and this is the output. But if you put some sample numbers into a table on an Excel worksheet or something similar to that, and produce some graphs from your data, you can see when you produce the graphs that they are mirror images of each other. And then if we added in our fixed costs so that we could work out average cost, because that's the more common cost curve that we use in our diagram, it would sit above the average variable cost, so it should be parallel there, a bit wavy. So that would be my average cost there. And the bigger the fixed costs, the bigger the space between the two. So where you get things like natural monopolies, where you've got a very high proportion of the cost being fixed costs or setup costs, then there'd be a big space between that average variable cost and average cost curve there. So where this intersects here on your cost curve is where it's productively efficient. So this is the most efficient mix of resources, where the cost of production is actually going to be at its lowest point, the average cost of producing a unit at its lowest point there. So productively efficient mix of resources to produce our output. And so one of the findings from this is that even though we've actually started to get diminishing returns just before we get to this point here, when the marginal cost actually starts to increase, that's our diminishing returns from about that point there, it's still beneficial for the business to keep on increasing its output because they're still benefiting from average costs decreasing. So from that point here, if we stopped production here, where diminishing marginal returns set in, that's the average cost. But if we keep on producing more and we get down to that point, we can really seriously lower our average cost. So it's still beneficial for the firm to increase output, but they just have to be aware that they are suffering from diminishing marginal returns. So each additional variable factor of production, we're assuming in this case that it's labour that they're adding, is slightly less efficient than the variable factor of production before it. So your 8th person adds less to total product than your 7th person added. And one of the reasons is because of the inclusion of these fixed costs as well, because you're being able to spread the fixed costs over a greater number of units. So therefore, the bigger the amount of fixed costs are, actually, the further up, we might have huge fixed costs. So we have an average cost curve that's do that in a different colour, is right up here, and therefore the greater the number of units you're going to want to produce. And if marginal cost, if I just draw it a little bit further up and it starts to intersect there, that's the point of productive efficiency, because you're still gaining as a business from spreading those fixed costs over a greater number of units. And where your average cost curve or variable cost curve starts to go to kind of a vertical point, it's looking like they're going up here, that's the maximum output. It's getting a bit messy around here, sorry. That's the maximum output that you can produce in the short run, because obviously, tying it all back to the short run, one of our factors of production is in a fixed quantity. So there will be a maximum output that this factory can produce. If you're looking at the long run, then obviously you can change that fixed factor of production, and you can vary your capacity, your maximum capacity. But that's when economies of scale and diseconomies of scale start to occur.